Hey, what's going on, RC drivers? Welcome back to the new workshop. We are back with our Losi Baja Rey project. I know a bunch of you have been waiting for this. I apologize for the delay. As some of you know, I moved. I'm here in a new workshop. This is actually a temporary workbench because a lot of the stuff you're seeing here still isn't finalized yet, but the project is back. And I did a little bit of work to it since you've last seen it. As I mentioned, I was going to put some more stainless steel screws in, and I did do that. And today we are going to work on installing the Robinson racing gear into the transmission. I did get the hot racing rear towers. These things look pretty rad. And then I have the Spectrum Firma ESC that we're going to install as well. And I think we're going to start putting this thing back together. I think by the end of this video, it's going to start looking like a truck again. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to go ahead and clean this transmission up because during just sitting around, it looks like the differential started to leak more. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. What I'm going to use is some Cow RC cleaner on it and some paper towels, get the grime off, the dirt off and stuff like that. Then we're going to go pull it apart. I'll show you what the new gear from Robinson Racing looks like next to the gear that's already in there. And you know, if there's any tips that I find along the way for swapping out, of course I'm going to stop and let you guys know. So after a little bit of time hanging over a trash can, spraying this thing down with different chemicals, I finally got this thing clean and presentable to show you guys. Basically, I just used a number of cleaners from the Cow RC that I mentioned before to some nitro cleaner and of course a brush and even a screwdriver to kind of just pick away at the cracks and crevices inside the transmission case to get everything out of there because you don't want dirt inside. That's when the gears could really just get damaged with all the crud that's in there. So you definitely want to get it out. And I got everything out finally. Now it's time to show you guys the new gear. So here is the old cluster gear from Losi, and then this is the new Robinson Racing cluster gear. If you put them up next to each other, you could really see the high quality machine work on a Robinson Racing gear. Just a really heavy duty gear that is going to last inside this truck. So swapping it out is pretty easy. Just got to switch over the bearings, slide it back in. And while I have everything apart, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild the differential. As I mentioned in one of the other videos, I'm going to put 500,000 weight oil in it. It actually feels like there's still some oil in here, even though the inside of the case is covered in grease and I think oil. There's still some stuff in here, but I'm going to go ahead, rebuild it, tighten everything down to make sure it doesn't seep, the oil doesn't seep out again. And just got to throw this thing back together. There's not much more to it than that. The center transmission is back in the truck. Getting that Robinson gear in there was fairly easy since I had most of the truck apart. But again, while it was out, I swapped out the oil. And when I did take that differential out, there was just a little bit of oil left in there. So it was a good thing I double checked that. And the screws were actually fairly loose. So I think that's where a lot of the oil inside that case came from. Nonetheless, I put it all back together. I didn't put any grease in there because I noticed a lot of sand gets inside of it, and I just don't want sand attaching itself basically to the gears and transmission case and possibly causing some problems later on. So I'm going to run that dry. I'm confident in that Robinson Racing gear and the Losi Spur gear that's on the differential there. So I think that will hold out well. Next up, we're going to move on to the shock towers, and these hot racing shock towers are awesome. The look of them, the material that they're made out of, they just feel so much stronger than the stock composite shock towers. Love the carbon fiber look on the side, the two-tone blue anodizing and black anodizing, the jeweled edge, even the hot racing logo. Of course, they give you all the hardware to swap it out as well. So I think this is a really worthy upgrade just by the looks of it so far. We'll see how it holds up with bashing, but man, these things feel strong. So this is just a simple swap out really. Like I mentioned, they do give you some hardware to go along with the installation, but I am going to see how much of the stainless steel hardware I can put on these shock towers as I go along. So I will swap these out, show you what they look like when it's all done. These hot racing shock towers look so cool on this truck. They bolt right in without any modifications and they feel really strong. The only tip I have to pass along to you is to add some thread lock compound to the screws that are going into the aluminum to make sure they don't back out. But other than that, this is a very cool upgrade for this truck. All right, it's time to start bolting on some of the other parts that we've already worked on. I've got my front end here. I've got my rear axle assembly. So I'm just gonna start throwing this truck back together. Then we're gonna move on to installing the speed controller, and I even have a RPM front bumper as well. So let me get this thing back together. I'm really excited to see how it looks. Hey, look at that. It's starting to look like a truck again. I have to tell you, after taking a long break from this project build, figuring out where all the screws went was kind of a pain, but I figured it all out. It's back together. It's starting to look really, really cool. Really digging this project. I know a bunch of you are. Now I have to put a couple other parts on that I told you guys about. I have to go ahead and put the speed controller in. For that, I'm going with the Spectrum Smart technology, 130 amp brushless speed controller that they have to offer. This one has an EC5 plug on it, so I'm going to upgrade to EC5 plugs. Luckily, I have a bunch of smart batteries to go along with it. But really cool ESC because it allows you to use the Spectrum telemetry. So I will probably pair it up with one of my DX5 radio systems. And this thing is just going to bolt right in. It's a bit more robust than the speed controller that was in there, but it does have the same bolt pattern. So I'll be able to bolt it down. The only issue is this connector. I think I'm just going to have to route it through the back here and plug it in. Probably use a zip tie just to secure everything, just because I can't feed it through the stock connector opening in the back. So that's not too big of a deal. The other thing I have to do is go and install the motor. Basically, I'm going to use the motor that was in the truck. It has a 10-tooth pinion on it, and for some reason I picked up a 15-tooth, which is a huge jump. Not something I often recommend doing, but for some reason I got this. I don't remember why. Maybe because I saw people were using this for their trucks, and that's why I got it. But anyway, I'm gonna put it on. Probably would recommend putting a fan on there as well, but the temperatures outside are really cold right now, so I'm not too worried about it, but I would suggest it if you're making that big of a jump on the pinion gear. Always monitor your temperatures when changing your pinion gear. You don't want to smoke a motor or a speed controller or any of your electronics for that matter. And finally, I also have to throw on the shocks. We kind of talked about the shocks in earlier videos, especially like the front. But the rear, I have these extra long Proline shocks. Just going to fill it with 30 weight oil and bolt them onto the rear of the truck. It's really simple installations. Just screw the parts back in where they came off of. So let me throw all that together and I'll show you how it looks. Then finally, we'll move on to the RPM bumper. All right, I've got all those parts in and everything went fairly smooth. The speed controller, you kind of have to just position a little bit and get the screws started and it will cinch it down onto the mount. The motor went right in. Just make sure you align your gear mesh and just double check it to make sure that the gear lash is proper on it. You want just a little bit of play in there, and that 15-tooth slot in the motor mount seemed to work just fine. Maybe add a little bit of Loctite to your pinion as well. Then I have the shocks installed. I actually wound up going with 35 weight oil because that's what I found when I went looking through my box. That's what went in there. The other thing I wanted to point out about the shocks is when you are building them, before you put the oil in, put 2 O-rings on the inside, maybe even 3 O-rings. These shocks are a bit longer than the original shocks, so the travel is a bit longer. So to limit it, you use O-rings. Everything is going to be even with the same O-rings in the shock. So 2 to 3 probably will do it for you. I have 2 in there, probably could have used one more. And then the only other tip I have is there is a little bit of slop side to side when you go and mount the shock into the mounts, upper and lower. So just use some washers to take up the slop so the shock isn't moving around. And that's really about it. I do have to find a spot to go and mount my switch. I will do that later once I get the body on. But right now we're going to move over to this RPM bumper, which from what I gather is a necessary bumper to have on this. I didn't break my bumper, but I heard that these brake and the RPM, of course, are really strong, so it should hold up to some abuse. Let me throw this on and we can wrap up this video. There's the RPM front bumper install. RPM just makes some great stuff. It bolts right on. And actually, while I was working on it, I remembered I went and picked up a Exotech front skid brace as well. This is a pretty heavy duty steel unit that basically helps brace the front of the chassis down below. It does push the bumper down a little bit, but I think that extra bracing is really something you guys might want to check out if you're really rough on your stuff, and don't worry about the loss of the clearance there. I think you guys will get by without issue, but this build is looking really awesome. I can't wait to drive this thing. And the only thing we really have left to do is install the body. I had a body custom painted by Larry at Custom RC Graphics, and I'm going to go bolt it on in the next episode, and then we're going to take it out and drive it. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell. Throw the video a like, and we'll see you back soon for some more RC Driver videos.